I really didn't want to be making this video. Not the exact way that I'm about to, at least. Obviously, at some point, I was going to have to talk about Starfield after it had come out, but it, I made a video not long before Starfield's release where I was kind of talking about my hopes and concerns for the game, things that I was hoping Bethesda might improve upon, problems that I think could arise from the formula they were going after. There's a link in the description that you can go to if you want to go see it, but the main thing that I ended that video on is that I wanted to be proven wrong, at least in terms of all my concerns. There's a lot of issues that I've had with Bethesda games, going all the way back to their days in Skyrim and Fallout 3 and Oblivion and whatnot, that I always felt like they barely made any improvements on after literal decades of making new games that you'd think that they could have changed and improved upon greatly in that time. And so I was hoping that maybe Starfield would be the game that finally fixes a lot of these issues while expanding the horizon to new heights and having all these new features. But now, over a month after it's come out, I keep playing it, trying to force myself to like it, but at some point, I just gotta admit that, for me at least, Starfield is just incredibly disappointing. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that Starfield is the worst game ever made. By all means, there are far worse games that have come out this year alone, looking at you, Redfall, that are just blow Starfield out of the water in terms of their complete awfulness. But Starfield just, it feels like it struggles to try and do all the things that it's wanting to do, and it feels incredibly unfocused. But there are at least some shining beacons of hope in the muck that I think shine through. And you know what? Let's start with the positives, because there are legitimate positives that I really do like about this game that I think are worth talking about first. And like I said, I'm not trying to say it's the worst game in the world. So, like, right off the bat, for example, the character creation I think is pretty good in terms of mechanically the kinds of things that you can add to your character. I like the various perks that you can choose, with various things being like having alien DNA or having a bounty on you. You know, you got your classics like Mysterious Stranger or the Adoring Fan, and new ones like having parents that actually interact with you in the game. Like, there's some cool stuff there, and I like that the effects that that can have on gameplay. And on a similar note, I also feel like this level up system in Starfield might be one of my most favorite leveling up systems that they've ever put out in any of Bethesda's games. One of the things I talked about a lot in my preview video where I was speculating was how I really didn't like the level up systems of Skyrim and Fallout 4, which almost felt like they were on the opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of the problems they had. In Skyrim, there were no stats at all, and the way you level up was this really annoying grinding system that I really don't like as a system, because it's so easy to just grind your way to the best bits of, you know, whatever character you want, and then now any character, no matter what, is really good at stealth and really good at heavy armor and stuff like that. And then Fallout 4 took it to the other extreme where you had all these stats, but then at the same time, because they wanted to have a perk at every single tier of stats, that meant that even having only 1 point in a stat meant that you could get some really insane buffs, like how 1 point in your character's toughness would make them have a ton of natural armor, or 1 point in precision would do all these cool things with guns. Like, it was really kind of silly, and also just kind of tedious to have to put in all these points and everything. And Starfield, I think, actually finds almost an exact happy medium between those two extremes, where you still are putting points into something resembling stats in a way, but there's also a grinding aspect, but it's also less annoying than it is in Skyrim, because instead of it just being that you passively level up your skills and various things by repeatedly doing rote actions, Now you put the points in the skill first, and then instead of having the upgrades to that skill locked behind arbitrary level caps like they are in Fallout 4, you now upgrade a skill by performing tasks relevant to that skill that are also very specifically defined and laid out for you so that you know what to go for, and then you can put more points into it. So like it's a less annoying grinding system than Skyrim and a less annoying point-based system than Fallout 4. So I think it actually does a really good combination of the two, and I also like how you access the higher tier skills, or perks rather, in each stat group by just putting points wherever you want in the earlier tiers so that you can still more free form adjust which perks you want and whatnot, instead of it being like in Skyrim where you had the perk trees, or in Fallout 4 where you had to reach a certain number in a stat before you could unlock something. Now, like, you could put all of your points in just the top row in order to unlock the bottommost row of perks, or you could spread it out across all the different rows, or even like invest a lot in one perk or spread it out across many perks. Like, there's lots of different ways to level up that I think are really good. I also really like that there's a big emphasis on building. Like, I like that you can customize your spaceship. I like that you can build bases basically anywhere. I loved building bases in Fallout 4, right? So surely being able to build bases everywhere would be a positive. And then there's lots of things like that that I think are actually legitimately good about this game. Honestly, if I had to pick one for most improved, it would probably be the writing quality. And to be fair, that's mostly because I'm going from Fallout 4 to this, where Fallout 4's writing was just bad. But in this game, there's a lot of quests that I've encountered that I feel were actually interesting dilemmas, and you were using real skill checks and having to make difficult decisions. Like, a common one that I see a lot of people run into early on is one where you find a colony ship from old Earth, but now, because they didn't have faster than light technology, they've been traveling for hundreds of years to catch up to the modern day society, where the planet they were going to has already been colonized by a corporation, and now you gotta negotiate terms between the colonists and the corporation to try and figure out what you're gonna do with each other and try to come to some sort of compromise between the two. So, like, there's a lot of interesting, and that's not the only cool quest that I've found so far. A lot of the side quests I found were actually pretty interesting, and to talk about the main quest a little bit, I was extremely enticed by the premise of the main storyline, which is more than I can say for games like Fallout or even Skyrim. Like, Fallout 4 and Skyrim, and actually a lot of Bethesda games, have this sort of awkward relationship with their main storylines where they're trying to create this sense of urgency. Like, Fallout 4 is an easy example because the main motivation is that your child has been kidnapped, right? So, if you're, in theory, invested in that storyline, then you should want to be not doing anything but tracking down your child. Because it is your child, and they are literally a baby that is completely defenseless. So, if you are, like, accurately role-playing as your character, you should be disincentivized from doing things like exploring or entering factions and doing all the things that you would associate with the Bethesda game, because the main storyline is far too urgent. So it creates this weird dissonance where either you're putting off this incredibly urgent main storyline that should be drawing your attention so that you can build houses for your friends in the wasteland, or you're not engaging with the core gameplay loop of the game because you're trying to participate in the main storyline. It's just two conflicting ideas that are clashing with each other. Whereas Starfield, I feel, their main premise is a lot more suited for the kind of game that it is, because, and I'm not going to go into late game spoilers as much as possible, but the early premise of the main story is that you simply find this strange artifact that from an unknown origin that gives you visions, and then that leads you to meeting up with an organization who's trying to track down more of these artifacts. And that's basically it for the main storyline. Like, there's no overarching plot where, like, oh no, the galaxy's gonna get destroyed, or the Reapers are coming and they're gonna eat everyone, or anything like that. No, it's just, find these artifacts, and, like, you're free to build up your resources and whatnot over time as you want, as long as you eventually find some way to stumble upon the other pieces of these artifacts and then bring them back to the main faction so that you can piece them together and figure out what they are. So like it all, I feel like there's a lot of positives that I feel are legitimate improvements over past Bethesda games that Starfield brings to the table. So like I said, I'm not trying to say that it is all negative. However, it's hard to deny that there are still massive, massive problems with almost every aspect of this game, and especially with the core gameplay loop. In my opinion, the biggest problem that Starfield has is actually sort of a new problem that they haven't really had before, and in fact used to be a strength in most of Bethesda's previous games. And that is the nature of exploration and how poorly it's handled in Starfield. The big selling point of most of Bethesda's games is that you have this big open world to explore, and you can look out into the horizon and see all these cool waypoints to, oh, I want to go to that mountain and explore what's at the top of it, or I see that big radiation storm in the distance, let's go see what's there, and all these cool, interesting things that make you want to go off the beaten path and explore every inch that this land has to offer. But Starfield fails in this regard pretty immensely, in my opinion. And the core of the issue is really just the lack of that horizon. Unlike in a game like Skyrim, you can't just look out into the distance and see an interesting landmark and go, oh, I want to explore that. Because the game is too big. There's too large of a scale for you to possibly see anything. Really, when you are exploring Starfield's galaxy, you're doing it from such a macro scale that landmarks just don't exist anymore. When you're on the star map, literally all you're seeing are dots in space because you have to zoom out so far just to be able to move to the next star system over. And then when you go into a star system, all you see are planets. You don't see what's on the planets other than just some icons that tell you what's there. But when you're not looking at the icons, when you're just trying to look at the planets in a system and the surface of those planets, the only real thing that you can see are what resources they have to offer if you were to exploit them. Not, oh, I see this interesting megastructure to explore, or there's a cool town over there to explore. Like, you can't see that until you've already landed on the planet. So as a result, exploration in Starfield kind of feels like you're playing a slot machine more than anything else. Like I said, in Fallout or Skyrim, you would see something in the distance and want to go to it, which would ensure that what you're going to find is at least something of note, because it was a landmark that you were able to see from a distance, and the natural reason for that from a game design standpoint is because they're trying to lure you towards something that is interesting and fun to explore. But in Starfield, they literally can't do that. You can't see a city from space. You can't see a cool mountain from space. You can't even see a planet when you're looking at the galaxy map. Like, all of the stars are completely indistinguishable, and if it wasn't for the labels and icons that actually let you tell them apart, you'd just be flying blind in space with no direction or really incentive to explore off the beaten path. It's like I said in my speculative video before the game even came out, when Todd was pointing at a moon that you can see from the surface of a planet, and he said, you can go there. Like I said, my response to that was, okay, but why would I? Because when you look up at that moon from the surface of the planet, all that you're able to see is just a ball. And in that particular case, a dull gray rock. But even if it had like a more lush surface, it's just a planet in the sky. It's not anything of note inherently. And there's a really misguided quote that I feel is relevant here. Famously, one of the managing directors was quoted in an interview a little while ago where people were talking about, oh, if the game has 1,000 planets or more, how are they all supposed to be interesting? And they said, not every place you visit is quote unquote supposed to be Disney World. The point of the vastness of space is that you should feel small. It should be overwhelming. Everyone's concerned that empty planets are going to be boring, but when the astronauts went to the moon, there was nothing there, but they certainly weren't bored. And yes, that is technically true. When the astronauts went to the moon, I'm almost certain they were never bored at any point during their time on the surface of the moon. In fact, if I recall correctly, the original plan when reaching the surface of the moon was that they were supposed to sleep because they had been up for 18 hours or whatever. But they just touched down on the surface of the moon. How were they not supposed to immediately get out and see what it was like out there? But that's because that was the first time we had done that. It was a massive achievement for all of humanity. The scale is a bit different here when you're talking about one of the arguably greatest achievements in the history of humanity and a video game. But even if we're talking about within the context of the video game's world, if we're trying to be role-playing as explorers within this game's universe, how is exploring a dead, empty world supposed to be interesting in a world with casual, faster-than-light travel that is seemingly available to anybody that's just managed to save up a few bucks to buy a spaceship? In this game, we're already, literally the start of the game is mining on some random world we've never heard of in some distant system far light years away from Earth. We're already exploring a different world, and it's mundane, because what else would it be in a world with casual space exploration? This is not a world where you're on the frontier of human achievement like the astronauts were on the Apollo missions. This is a world where there's literally people that are stated to commute between star systems to go to their daily job. They'll live in Alpha Centauri and commute to the Sol system to go to work, and then fly back to Alpha Centauri to go to bed. That's the level of casualness that space travel is treated with in the world of Starfield. So, yeah, the first time you set out on a planet, in-game, is going to be exciting because, oh, it's a brand new world that I've never seen before. But, the 10th time you do it, it's gonna start losing some luster. And the 100th time you do it, you're not even gonna stop for a second to admire the view. You're just probably trying to survey all of the life and minerals and whatnot on the planet as quickly as possible so that you can pack up and leave and completely forget about it. The idea that a boring, empty planet is supposed to be inherently interesting just because it's in space is just such an incredibly flawed notion, and yet it feels like the entire game was built around it. They even go on to say later on in that interview that, we could have made a game where there are just 4 cities and 4 planets to explore, but that would not have had the same feeling of being this explorer. But honestly, I would rather play that game a million times over than continue to explore Starfield's barren wasteland of a galaxy. When I first got to Constellation, the main faction that you're researching the artifacts for, I thought it was always kind of silly and absurd how, in this world with casual, faster-than-light travel, for some reason this is apparently the only faction in the entire galaxy that is still even remotely interested in exploring space and exploring new frontiers. Because I was like, if anybody could just buy a spaceship and just start exploring throughout the galaxy, why would there not be, thousands of these factions? How is the only faction dedicated to exploration this one ragtag group of, half a dozen people? And that's it. But now, after playing the game for a few dozen hours, I get it. It's because they made space as boring as possible. And I just don't feel motivated to explore anymore, which just feels like the antithesis of what a Bethesda game is about. And so as a result, I'm left with this game where instead of just exploring the world naturally and going to wherever I feel is interesting and fun to explore and creating my own stories based off of my own personal experiences with all these fun, places that I've discovered, I'm just kind of going from quest to quest, following instructions and just doing whatever because there's just no reason to explore these worlds. Like I mentioned earlier, that it's like, oh yeah, you could build a base on any of these millions of planets, right? But it's like, but why would I? I just don't feel the incentive to do so. Like, oh yeah, I can build a base on this barren rock, or I can build a base on a different barren rock that has a few trees on it. And it's like, it's hard to know, like, because you don't know how cool a place is going to look until after you land there. And I just don't feel like trying to land on 1,000 different planets until I finally find the one place that looks cool. And, like, as a result, I actually unironically prefer the base building in Fallout 4 because you could only build in predefined locations that were designed to be interesting. Like, you had a suburban town, you had a deserted island, you had this drive-in movie theater, like, all these fun and interesting places that you could build, they each had their own meticulously designed challenges and advantages for you to exploit. And, like, that made the base building more fun than just landing on some random planet with some basic procedurally generated terrain that offered basically zero challenges or anything because it's just a big flat empty rock. And so as a result, like, building in one place doesn't feel any different than building in another place beyond just what's in the distant skybox, and that's it. But yeah, I mean, I could go on and on about how other aspects of this game have problems, like how I think the combat is relatively mediocre, or how I think the main story does not pay off well at all. But in my opinion, a lot of these kinds of problems that are in a lot of Bethesda games are usually excusable because you could just have fun exploring the world and finding new things. But as a result, it feels like what they did with this game is, you remember how when Skyrim was coming out, and they were talking about how there was this whole radiant quest system that would let you play, quests for as long as you want because they would just keep giving you new ones. And, like, when the game came out, everybody immediately saw through it because every single one of those was basically just the same 3 quests over and over again, and everyone got bored of them instantly. It feels like they took that and made it bigger and applied it to the nature of the world's exploration. So that now, with the terrain and landmarks being procedurally generated, even if you do land on a planet and you see some cool building in the distance or some cave system that makes you want to explore it, if you're decently far into the game, then chances are it's the exact same abandoned mining facility full of pirates that you've already cleared out a dozen times, or it's the exact same partially excavated cave that you've already explored a dozen times. So yeah, as always, I'm always happy to continue the conversation down in the comments below, and by all means, I would love to hear from you guys, so let me know, like, is there something specific that you think I'm missing that I might enjoy about the game? Or maybe if it's just that some people don't mind the exploration aspect of it, and are focusing more on the story or the gameplay, even though I personally feel like the core combat and gameplay loop is also pretty mediocre at best. So by all means, feel free to let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and I'll be happy to talk to you more about this in the future, and maybe I'll make a follow-up video if you guys can convince me to pop in this game for another few dozen hours to try it out for a little bit longer. But until then, I guess I'll have to put this game aside and try something else that's come out this year. But if you like what you saw, make sure to leave me a like. If you want to see me make more videos like this in the future, make sure to leave me a subscribe so that you can get notified of when I make more videos like this going forwards. With that, I'll have to say I thank you for watching, and I guess I'll see you guys next time.